Okay, good afternoon, Professor, or good morning. Greetings, Professor. I'm going to try to make this as within 15 minutes. I like to talk. But first off, with narrative therapy, that is, yeah, it's a psychotherapy type approach. It was developed in the 1990s by, was it White and Epstein, who were both social workers. So the approach to this, I mean, what I like about negative therapy is because I see it to be very empowering to the client because it's their story, it's their opportunity to speak. I mean, some of the techniques is to externalize their problems. They minimize, and I think by externalizing your problems, you also minimize some of those problems, and you see the problems through the lens of almost like the systems theory and through a constructivist theory. Yes, constructivist. And the fact that our environment, and there's a lot of things that can influence and affect the problems that we may be experiencing. Um, and I looked through some text, and I didn't find a whole lot on narrative therapy, but I found some really interesting information from Turner, from the Turner book. It's the social work treatment book. I wrote some notes here, and I'm trying to find them right now. But it talks about Turner talked about how how the narrative, the actual narrative therapy is coupled with systems theory, in which the views support what people have experienced through that point, and how the environment can influence those problems and those views. Um, and both Turner and Marche, illustrated this. Marche was talking about COVID-19 and how COVID has had an impact on Karen's life and some of her problems. And I believe, we talked about how her, maybe she's not done grieving for her husband, but I think a part of that might be because of the impact COVID has had on a lot of people's lives and staying. It's hard to move on, and it's hard to me to complete that grieving process when you're locked down. And again, that, and in telling that story and be able to verbalize that and use that narrative, I think people would believe that, they would see that, and they would use their own empowerment to move forward through that. So in using that technique, like I said, externalizing the problem would be one technique. They reframing the problem through the social context, like I had already mentioned with the COVID. And then the client telling their story, being guided by the clinician. This is another technique. It can reframes the narrative, and people who, like Karen, she might see life a little bit differently when she actually is able to open up and talk about what she's doing and how she's living her life, when she has to weigh, like she mentioned, the times that she had with Deborah versus sitting at home, grieving about her husband. And I think by verbalizing these things and saying them out loud, they become more real, and then the person begins to change that narrative, especially the future narrative, their future story. What could it entail? Because I'm sure Karen doesn't want to sit there and say, well, I'm just going to continue to sit at home and be sad. So that's what I think is great about this, because it gives, to me, it's very empowering, and I'm a true believer in individuals' power and self-determination. I think this approach can be used, and we've saw in examples that individuals, families, small groups, um, and I think it can be used across culture because it is the individual story. I think the problem that we might have in some cultures is where there's the power dynamics of certain cultures, like different Asian cultures. They don't want to take responsibility for some of their achievements. They would rather pin their success on the system itself instead of their own achievements. So I think that might be a challenge in some cultures that do that, especially in like maybe some cultures where females are, I know, like Middle Eastern cultures. and I don't know how to say this without being politically incorrect, but females are not treated as equals in society. Um, and I think that would be hard to use this narrative therapy on a female from a culture who follows that, and especially when that female believes in that too, and she doesn't want to be empowered. That's where I see culture might be an issue, and so when I say cross-culturally, I want to be a little vague about that because, like I said, it's an individual story. So language barriers, socioeconomic barriers, things of that nature are, to me, irrelevant with this approach as long as the client, is able to tell their story and see how, the system, and from a constructivist theory, how their environment has affected their story, their problems that they're dealing with, and when they're able to externalize those problems, which again is another technique, that they can rewrite that story and overcome those problems. Another thing I thought about this, and this is going back to some of my readings from EMDR, is that and I forget the term, but when we revisit memories, every time we go back into a memory and tell this story or talk about this memory or just reminisce on this memory, we add or we take away certain parts of it. And so I think and that's where I think the clinician's role is very important in narrative therapy, because they can assist in focusing on strengths. So when a client reaches back into that story, they can they can bring out the more positive aspects of it and focus on those things, which again will help minimize the problem and externalize it. I think the limitation with that is already mentioned, some different cultures. I think one limitation would be when you have a client like Karen who doesn't want to open up and talk, who's just a little uncooperative. But with that, I also think that, a client who has a lot of self-worth and self-confidence issues may not want to take that empowering role. They may not feel ready for it. And again, this may be with cultural considerations as well. But I think about that, and I see that in some of my groups with some of the young women that I work with. They've been somebody else's property for so long, it's hard for them to empower themselves and control their own emotions and make a life for themselves. And in that population, I think that narrative therapy would be limited in trying to use something like that. And the last thing would be, like I said, the identifying self-talk, where when somebody says they're an addict, I'm an alcoholic, I'm an addict. They identify with those things, and it makes it that much harder to externalize these problems through narrative therapy. Okay, I'm going to stop now because I have other things to talk about. Okay, so in reference to the preparatory empathy triangle, stages of development, I don't want to stray from anything Marche had in her case study, because I think it's really accurate what her theory on Karen. Demographically, we know Karen is an older, single, widowed black female in a country that's experiencing a pandemic. On top of all of that, she's, I'm not really sure what her socioeconomic standing was, but we saw that she has social interactions. She had social interactions, but I think with just her demographic, it's a little bit harder for her to get out and interact with other people, especially when you pile on her depression. Researchable. What I think I would look into before this, knowing what I know of Karen, is I would try to become a lot more familiar with the stages of grief and how narrative therapy, or anything for that matter, could help move her through those stages and build her confidence in herself at the same time. Because she when she talked about, her service and helping other people, to me, that's a sign of strength. I think that this woman Karen has her own strengths that she can depend on and build on. But that's what I would want to research. There is the what I said on research stages of grief. Of course, they're in the middle. I guess it was their third the third meeting, so I want to say that's still probably kind of the beginning, maybe the middle. Tuning into myself for that, I would be nervous. I would be apprehensive, because I would really want her to not just tell me her story, but because I am a white male, almost middle-aged white male. Just her telling her story is going to be hard for me to understand it. So I would want to make sure that she's able to not just tell me the story, but help me live the story and walk through it with her. So that would be something that I would also want to figure out how I could interact with that. And I would be nervous. I would be extremely nervous because I would be afraid that I would say the wrong thing. And knowing her attitude and her wanting to be really quiet and uncooperative and telling the story, I would have to make sure that I myself am not hungry, I don't feel bad, I'm well rested, because I would be afraid that I would lose my patience. And I would, honestly, I'd never lose my patience, but I would be aware of that. I think I pretty much covered a lot of the cultural and socio political forces in what I just said previously, and everything that's involved in Karen's life. And then tuning into the client, I want to make sure that I do understand if she has any other medical issues, chronic pain, things of that nature that might make it uncomfortable for her to sit in front of the computer screen for a while. I want to make sure she's comfortable. I would want to find something that we have in common, that we can talk about at the beginning of the session, to make her relax, to make her open up, before we start moving into something else. And now that I know she likes to cook, I would want to talk to her about food, because I like to cook and I really like to eat. So I think that's, and tuning into her, that's what I would want to look at, is using that to leverage her motivation and her commitment to service and things of that nature. And then number 3 on the recorded session, what do I think about the narrative model? And I said earlier that I think it's great. I think it's empowering, and I do, and I like that. I just don't think it's applicable for everyone. And it's funny because the more I look at this, the more I've read about this over the last day or two, is I see, that's a lot of what we kind of do in our group settings, in our process groups. That's what we do. We encourage people to tell their story, and then we encourage others who have walked that story to give feedback and encouragement. And we externalize, and I found myself, doing it after, looking back at what I've done in my groups and then reading through some of this narrative therapy. I do a lot of externalizing with clients, and I'm going to use her name, just her first name, but I have a client, her name is Mackenzie. She's a 23-year-old, and that's probably more information than you need, but she's young, and it's funny because after working with her for a bit, she said she broke up with herself. And that other person in her addiction was the not Mackenzie. So it's funny because she was able to almost externalize all of those issues by labeling them the not Mackenzie. And I thought it was cute when she said it, but it was a point that just, I don't know, I'm getting off on a tangent, but it made me feel good. And it makes her feel good, because when she does start to doubt herself and fall back in her insecurities and her lack of self-confidence, I'm able to tell her, oh, wow, that sounds like the not Mackenzie. And like I said, and I think that there's a place for this therapy, in the eclectic approach of a lot of models that we use. And I think it's huge. This is really huge on building relationships and empowering our clients. Okay, so this is 15 minutes, and I'm going to be done here. I've got to get me somebody to do the actual demonstration with, and I'll get that to you soon. But hope I didn't talk too much. I hope you have a great holiday.